Hello, everyone. Welcome back or welcome. My name is Jim Ippolito. I'm the Rattan Law Endowed Chair of Soil Health and Soil Fertility at The Ohio State University, and I'm also the chairperson of this National Academy Study Committee. Welcome. In my role as chair of the study and as the moderator of this committee meeting, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here in the room in DC, those of you watching the live stream, and all of you who may be watching this recording later. The task being undertaken by this committee of the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine is to assist the USDA in building a framework for addressing PFAS on agricultural land. The committee's full statement of tasks can be found on the study website, which is available at the link under Project to the right of the embedded video if you are watching online. Before I introduce today's speakers, I want to note that this is an open, on-the-record session. Interested individuals and members of the press have been invited to join as observers. This is not a news conference, however, and we will not be entertaining questions from the audience. Reporters who would like to talk with members of the committee are kindly asked to touch base with the staff officer, Kara Laney. Also, anyone who would like to submit a written comment or document to the committee is welcome to do so by clicking the Provide Feedback link on the right side of the study website. You can also subscribe for updates about the study by signing up for the National Academy's Board on Agriculture and Natural Resources listserv, also on the right side of the page. I also would like to remind everyone that this is an information gathering session, and that is, the committee is in the process of assembling materials that it will examine and discuss in the course of making its findings and conclusions. Therefore, I ask everyone to be mindful of the fact that the committee has made no conclusions and that it would be a mistake for anyone to leave the meeting today thinking otherwise. Comments made by individuals, including members of the committee, should not be interpreted as positions of the committee or of the academies. In addition, committee members typically ask probing questions in these information gathering sessions that may not be indicative of their personal views. The committee will deliberate thoroughly before writing its draft report, and moreover, once the draft is written, it must go through a rigorous review by experts who are anonymous to the committee, and then the committee must respond to this review with appropriate revisions adequately satisfying the Academy's Report Review Committee and the National Academy of Sciences president before it is considered an official Academy's report. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome our guests from the NRCS. And what I'd like to do is to briefly go through each individual up front, and then we'll turn the floor over to our invited guests. So today with us is Cale Horton. Cale is a hazardous waste program manager for the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Farm Services Agency. He is responsible for investigation and remediation of former USDA Commodity Credit Corporation grain storage facilities across the Midwest. Prior to beginning this role in 2020, Cale was project manager for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Also with us today is Jean Kim. Jean is the National Discipline Lead for Water Quality and Aquatic Ecology within the Science and Technology Division of NRCS. He leads the development and implementation of conservation practices and policies aimed at protecting and improving water quality and aquatic ecosystems on agricultural lands, and provides technical expertise and guidance to NRCS staff at the state and regional levels on matters related to water quality and aquatic ecology. Also joining us is Charlotte Kirk-Bear. Charlotte is the National Discipline Lead for Animal Husbandry within the NRCS. Prior to joining the agency, she was Managing Director of the Food and Environment Program of the Union of Concerned Scientists, where she provided strategic leadership for science analysis, outreach, and advocacy. Her background encompasses over 20 years of senior level management of agricultural research, education, and extension programs. Next is Barbie Prime. Barbie has over 20 years of professional experience supporting federal natural resource programs through the development and implementation of environmental policy relating to planning, acquisition, and program management. She serves as the NRCS National Environmental Compliance Expert, providing leadership and coordination in environmental affairs for the NRCS resource planning activities. And last on our list of distinguished speakers this morning is Bill Reck. Bill is the National Environmental Engineer at NRCS. He has over 30 years of experience in hydrology and hydrologic engineering, wetland restoration and treatment, and design and evaluation of conservation practices, as well as extensive experience in animal waste management, structural design, and evaluation of existing structures. And so with that, I'd like to open it up for our speakers from the NRCS, or USDA, I apologize. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. So next slide, please. Oh, I got control. Sorry. I had control. There we go. All right. So we're going to cover a number of things today. This is our second time with you, and we're going to start off with a little bit of follow-up from our last discussion. During Q&A, you asked us some questions, and we said we'd get back to you, so we want to make sure that we do that. Gene Kim is going to talk to us about the conservation evaluation and monitoring activity, the SEMA, that we have that we are currently using to help producers with PFAS. Charlotte's going to talk to us about NRCS-supported science. Kale is going to talk to us about hazardous substances in agriculture, and Barbara is going to talk to us about NEPA. So let's start off with the follow-up from last time. Again, my name is Bill Reck, National Environmental Engineer for NRCS. So last time we had a question about PFAS and our web soil survey. And we, at the time, said we weren't sure if we knew that it was being worked on. We weren't sure if it had been implemented. Now we can say it has been implemented. It is a part of the web soil survey. You can easily, there's a link here you'll have in the slides that you can get to it, and some further instructions for how to drill down to the couple modules that we have for PFAS, basically a PFAS attenuation in soils and a PFAS movement class piece of our online web soil survey. I will say that we also have some additional tools that aren't online that we use in-house for things like making a statewide map. Web soil survey is more for a public-facing tool. We do have some inward-facing tools that we do use. Last time we were asked to provide a definition of an agricultural system, because we talked about that as a part of our presentation. We wanted to take a minute and try to give you a little bit more of a formal definition as we see it. If this doesn't work, we can still do some Q&A and maybe we're not understanding the question. But I'm just going to read this to you because we took some time putting this together and I don't want to get it wrong. So in NRCS working context, and for the purposes of this study, an agricultural system is a farm level system, not a food system. Because we work at the farm level and practices are applied, our conservation practices are applied on the farm. And even though they do work in a larger ecosystem, we're interested in farm level conservation. Farm level systems does not include products beyond the farm gate. We're not interested in marketing or processing or the food products that are sold. That falls to other agencies. Our purview is conservation on the farm. Risk. There was a couple questions that were asked about risk, and we just thought it would be good for us to just circle back and say that we're asking you to identify factors that we should consider when we're evaluating the risk of on-farm actions that we're doing with our conservation programs. We don't want to make the problem worse, and that applies to both soil and water contamination on or off the farm. There was a question about livestock contamination with PFAS, and I want to circle back and just say again that our role with livestock is very similar to our role with soil, water, plants. And we work with resource concerns, and we say soil, water, plants, animals, and I forgot one: soil, water, plants, air. Thank you, air. So we would look at livestock as part of the animal part of that. We're about conservation. We're not about the production piece. The production piece belongs to the producers themselves. We want to help them to take care of those natural resources on their farm. And it's about those practices and activities that producers can implement, in relation to those resource concerns. PFAS, we were asked, how are we able to do this? Is it a resource concern? PFAS itself, we have a list, and it is not directly listed there. However, we have resource concerns that include runoff or leaching of chemicals, and we would consider PFAS to fall into that category. I want to take a minute and talk a little bit about easements versus working lands for our working lands conservation programs. You can divide up what we do in a couple different categories. One is where we're taking an easement on an agricultural property, where we're going to actually, as the government, own an easement. When we're owning an easement, we're going to do a lot more due diligence and look and make sure that there is no PFAS issue on that property. And if there is, it is currently not eligible for us to take an easement on it. Working lands for conservation is where we're going to a producer and providing them technical or financial assistance for them to help them install conservation practices on their private lands. So those two are kind of different. And, as you can imagine, the risk for those two are kind of different. We do have a policy on hazardous substances. I know that has been mentioned. We currently have policy that says we're not to be working with hazard substances. I wanted to give you an example of that pre-PFAS of what that meant to us. If we were to say make a visit to a farm and we saw a pile, a dumping ground for, say, pesticide chemical containers, we as an agency would not provide assistance with the removal of those pesticide containers. We would bring that up as an issue to the producer and tell them they need to take steps to address that issue, but we wouldn't do it. Why? Because we don't know what else is there. We don't know what chemicals are there, and frankly, our staff is not trained on all the pesticide chemicals that are out there, what potential there could be. We're trained in providing conservation, not dealing with hazard waste. Another example would be underground storage of petroleum products. We provide secondary storage for petroleum products, but a lot of farmers, we may come to them and they'll say, well, I have this underground storage of petroleum. I want to replace that with an above ground new petroleum storage with secondary containment. We can help them with that part, but the removal of the underground storage, we would not help them with because we don't know what's there. If you pull out an underground petroleum storage, and there is a leak, you now have a whole lot more problem than what you thought you dealt were there to start with. So because of that unknown, because of our staff not being professionals that have experience with that remediation of, say, a leaking petroleum tank, we don't do it. We will help with an agrochemical handling facility so that they can have a facility where they could properly and safely load up pesticides, and the same thing with secondary petroleum storage. You load up and properly store petroleum chemicals. What we don't deal with the unknowns of the hazardous substances that could be there that we don't know about. Hopefully that helps understand how we deal with hazardous substances in our working lands conservation. We had a question about Conservation Reserve Program, CRP, and a crosswalk with practices. We're not going to go into that today. We know that you're going to have a presentation from the Farm Service Agency staff, and they will cover that crosswalk with practices. There is a crosswalk, and it is it is an important issue. It will be covered when Farm Services Agency provides gets to that point. Okay, at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Gene Kim for the next part of the presentation.
All right. Good morning. Again, I'm one of the PFAS leads for our agency, Gene Kim, the National Discipline Lead for Water Quality and Aquatic Ecology. So glad to be here. Part of my academic background is looking at PCBs in the Great Lakes, looking at a couple hundred congeners versus a few thousand PFAS. So this is truly a daunting task to assist farmers with PFAS concerns. So I want to start by talking about our PFAS testing capabilities, both outside of NRCS and inside the agency. This is where a lot of farmers start their PFAS journey, the awareness, the testing, the discovery of PFAS on their operations. It really, PFAS testing, even though it's probably one of our more benign activities, is no trivial matter because, as we know, many of the laboratory methods are being developed and validated for the agricultural media. Regulations are being promulgated, and there's a lot of uncertainty in what the outcomes of our PFAS testing will reveal. So it's careful balance between protecting the food supply and also the livelihood of generations of farmers. So I want to give you a little background on what we offer under our conservation evaluation and monitoring activities, what we call CEMAs. CEMAs are offered through our Environmental Quality Incentives Program, EQIP. There are financial assistance to defray the costs for farmers to go outside of NRCS and work with non-federal partners for assessment of our conservation practices or our conservation plans. This really is akin to the last stage of our conservation planning process, the assessment stage. So it either marks the end of a planning process or perhaps the beginning of a new planning process. So we are offering this through our qualified individuals. Each of our CEMAs has specific guidance on what counts as a qualified individual's credentials. And this really does expand NRCS's ability to get conservation advice to farmers, especially in those areas that we don't have the expertise for. So other CEMAs that you might be familiar with, or to give you a flavor, are edge of field water quality monitoring, feed and forage testing, soil health testing, ag energy evaluations, et cetera. So since 2023, we've offered CEMA 209 for PFAS testing in water or soil. Again, this is to help defray the costs for farmers to reach out and get their testing done by qualified, EPA approved or state approved samplers, as well as laboratories that are using the approved methods. This is offered nationwide, but has been subject to available funding and interest. To date, the interest has been minimal. I could probably count it on one hand, the number of times this has been contracted. I think it's important to describe what this SEMA is intended for and what it's not intended for. It's really best thought of as a pre-screening step for farmers to take a few targeted samples to determine if PFAS might be on their operation. So you're going to look for areas where PFAS tends to accumulate, and if you find a positive, significant contamination, the next step would be, to have the farmer look for more comprehensive sampling or to reach out to the relevant state or federal agency because our PFAS regulations vary across the landscape. So it really is not meant to do a couple of things. It's not meant to quantify the acceptable or unacceptable PFAS levels for state cleanups, or it's not meant to be compared to regional screening levels in a quantitative sense. It's really not meant to take the place of other sampling offered at the state level or through EPA. So if other funding sources are out there, it would be great if farmers use them. But it is available for farmers who have these concerns. So each SEMA describes the qualifications. In this case, we have require the qualified individual to meet the EPA definition of environmental professional according to the all appropriate inquiries rule, and has to meet one of these 4 qualifications based on education or experience. This is intended to make sure that the people that the farmer hires have the training, the qualifications, and the certifications to go out there and sample correctly, to understand the cross-contamination issues, to understand what the interferences and what the thresholds are, and to help them make sure that their sample numbers are correct. We want to avoid false positives, false negatives, because those have implications. And we also have, on the internal capacity, we work within the Farm Production and Conservation Mission Area with our sister agencies, Farm Services, Risk Management, the Business Center. We've worked closely with Agricultural Research Service, which is outside of our mission area, on a variety of technical gaps. In particular, one is our analytical capabilities to detect PFAS. At present, NRCS does not have this within our soil properties or what we traditionally sample for. So we've partnered with USDA ARS in Arizona, provided them some instrumentation, and they in turn have done some introductory training. They've made the instrument available for our staff if we have projects that require PFAS analysis, and they've agreed to analyze this, samples that are prepared for injection. So that stands ready for our partnership. There are a couple other partnerships with ARS I want to mention. We're working on a larger agreement with ARS to look for quantification of a database, mining the data for agricultural thresholds, for practice effectiveness, for PFAS. We're looking toward ARS and Fargo to look at food, animal uptake, depuration, also the use of feed additives to prevent uptake of PFAS. Also, we're looking toward biochar in terms of looking at it compared to traditional activated carbon, and also the ability for it to either be destroyed by microwave treatment or desorbed, and that way we can use it, reuse it, and hopefully enhance, reduce bioavailability, enhance soil health, and bind PFAS in place. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Charlotte to go over more of our research.
Great. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. Jean just talked to you about some of the internal activities that we have and the science that is supporting what we do. And I just want to give you a little bit of information about some of the external partnerships that we have on PFAS science. And that way, I hope it will help you as you carry out your statement of task, for you to understand the kinds of signs that we currently have, so that that may help you when you are identifying gaps. We know that's a very small portion of your statement of task, but it's an important one. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew what we had underway. So back in 2022, I think, is when we really entered the PFAS realm, and we began that entry with the partnership of a multi-state consortium of research universities, and asked them to help us with different activities across the nation, different science projects that are being conducted at universities across the United States. And so we launched that activity with a summit then in 2023. And that was to help us kind of get kind of an environmental landscape sense of what was going on. And the summit covered all of the topics that you have listed there on the right. And some of those presentations are available on the website that is live at the Ohio State University. So even though that was a couple of years ago, I'd encourage you to go back and look at that. There was a lot of good information presented there, and it covers the realm of what goes on with PFAS. And so that was very helpful to us when we began the project with the multi-state research consortium. In addition to the summit, as I mentioned, there are projects that are ongoing right now at different universities across the United States. And I just wanted to touch on some of those so that you would know what we're learning. And I ask each of the PIs to give me just a sentence or two about what the most interesting finding is so far. And they've done that, and I just want to highlight those here. I also want to make note, though, that this is all preliminary, and so further investigation is needed. And we shouldn't make any conclusions yet, but they did want to share some of the interesting findings that are taking place. The first study that I'll talk about is being conducted at the Colorado State University by Tom Borch. And the most interesting thing that he's found so far to date, this is a study on pyrolysis of biosolids to biochar to limit PFAS transfer. So what he's found is that pyrolysis successfully removes more than 97% of PFAS mass at temperatures as low as 300 degrees. And so that's that wasn't something that was expected, but I'm going to let you read the rest of this at your leisure. There are some other interesting points there that I think would be useful for you to know. The second study, I don't have a lot of information or results yet, but there is something interesting here. This is a study at Virginia Tech by Kong Zhu. And she has seen that PFAS seems to be showing up in soils without prior biosolids application. And she's wondering if perhaps a national survey might need to be done in terms of PFAS in precipitation, so rainwater, and that as a source in soils. So that's something that people are thinking about. Another study here is the effect of soil type, physiochemical properties, and organic carbon addition on leaching potential of PFAS. This is a study by Nick Bosta at The Ohio State University. It is a lab column study, and what's being found is that PFAS is in the first leachates from soil columns for soils without biosolids. Also, PFAS flushes out quickly in the first two eluates, and you see this for freshly collected soils and then soils that have been stored for about 30 years. So he's wondering if PFAS washes out. Why do we see any in PFAS in the leachate? And similar to the previous study that I just suggested, that wondering here also if PFAS is in rainwater and is a potential source. So that's come up in a couple of the projects that we're supporting, that question. Another study actually has some results that have been recently published in the Journal of Environmental Quality and actually featured on the cover of that. This is a study by Heather Pressendance at Pennsylvania State University. She conducted some greenhouse experiments to assess the relative contribution of foliar absorption and root uptake in beneficial reuse systems or irrigation with treated wastewater for corn and for orchard grass. And what's interesting is that the root uptake is the dominant pathway, suggesting that spray irrigation may not pose an additional risk for PFAS uptake in forage crops. So thinking about those crops that are grown and then again fed to animals. And another, just kind of an aside, is she's working with 3 farmers, and despite 50 years of biosolids application on their farms, their wells don't appear to exceed EPA drinking water standards for PFAS. Again, that's an aside. So the study that you may want to take a look at in the Journal of Environmental Quality is entitled From Wastewater to Feed, Understanding PFAS Occurrence in Wastewater Irrigated Crops. And that's an excellent study, and really encourage you to look at that. The next study I wanted to talk about was one that is being conducted by Jack Huang at University of Georgia. It's a study on enhanced biosolids treatment and composting by enzyme and fungi facilitated processes for PFAS mitigation. So he's looking at transformation of PFAS in biosolids by enzyme catalyzed oxidative humidification reactions, and hoping that we can identify pathways capable of transforming PFAS under different conditions and mitigating PFAS in biosolids. So we're looking forward to some results there. The next one is a strategy development for mitigating PFAS uptake by food crops from soils receiving land-applied biosolids. And this is Dr. Lee's study, and I won't go into detail, and you can talk to him about that at your leisure. But this one is a study that's looking at using soil amendments to sequester PFAS in soils and minimize PFAS uptake and accumulation in food crops and vegetables. So to date, greenhouse experiment results indicate that soil amendment could significantly reduce PFAS presence in soil pore water and substantially reduce PFAS accumulation in vegetables. And the plants can grow well in the presence of soil amendment. So that's another one underway. In addition, then that kind of concludes the consortium of research university science that we're supporting. We also have another activity that is USDA supported with Maine. That's administered through our Farm Service Agency, and that is that's a partnership with the Maine Department of Agriculture, Conservation, and Forestry. And it's a PFAS fund, which provides the opportunity for research and for grant opportunities. So it's supporting both of those things. And I've listed the website here. And if you're not familiar with it, I'd encourage you to go look at the opportunities there and what they are supporting. Then I also want to mention that we have, since the very beginning of looking at PFAS, we started by asking a contractor to look at literature reviews and summarize the science for us. And we wanted to understand what we knew, what our knowledge was at the time. And we have a report that in the report are some useful pieces of information like the table listed here that kind of summarizes NRCS conservation practices and their potential application. So that may be useful to you. And if you don't have a copy of that report, we're happy to provide it to you. Again, it's not something that we actually use or endorse, but it's something that's been done for us and it may be useful to you. Then finally, we are supporting your work, and this is you, the last time we met with you, and we are very much looking forward to some valuable recommendations and results from your deliberations. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to my colleague in Kansas City, Cale Horton, who's with the Farm Service Agency. Cale?
Yeah, thanks, Charlotte. Can everyone hear me okay? Just want to do a technical check here. Sound good?
Yeah. Yes,
Okay. And you'll control my slides, right, Charlotte?
I sure will.
Okay, perfect. Well, good morning, and thank you all for having me here today. As the introducing speaker indicated, my name is Cale Horton. I'm a hazardous waste program manager with USDA's Farm Service Agency. I manage and clean up contaminated sites across the Midwest where USDA, or the Commodity Credit Corporation, and Farm Service Agency is actually what's known as the potentially responsible party. And I held that similar capacity for the Department of Defense at a major Army installation prior to this position. So I've been working in circle cleanup sites for a lot of years now. So with that, I want to talk to you a little bit about liability, really. I think it would be an oversight if we don't consider both farmer liability and agency liability when we're talking about CERCLA, or the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liabilities Act, and hazardous substances together. Because as we all know, EPA recently designated PFOA and PFAS as hazardous substances under CERCLA. And liability can come in all shapes and forms. It can come from consent decrees straight from EPA all the way to local and third-party lawsuits, and even state directed corrective actions on specific sites. But really what it means is two criteria must be met. There has to be a hazardous substances, and there has to be a release. And again, it's really a polluters pay first type of law, regardless of where you're looking at it. And there can be legal action taken, and it's very broad in nature. So any past or present owner or operator can hold some level of liability. And when you get into the operator aspects of that, that's anyone that is involved in management on a particular contaminated site. And that includes arrangers or transporters, or even those conducting hazardous waste operations at the site. Liability can also, it has a very broad type of legal framework as well. It can be retroactive, which basically means there was no law in place when the hazardous substance was released. But that doesn't matter, because that can catch up to the individual owner or operator after the fact. It can be joint and several. It means it can be multiple parties held responsible, whether you were the actual owner, you were the operator at the site, or if you were simply an arranger or a transporter of hazardous waste on or about the facility. And it's also strict, meaning regardless of negligence. So, but you may have not been, the individuals involved may have not been known they were doing anything wrong at the time. But strict liability, again, kind of plays into that polluters pay first type of policy. So what do we know with PFAS and agriculture? Well, there's been some guidance, some enforcement guidance put out by EPA when they came out with the CERCLA rule, or shortly thereafter, that basically said they were going to focus on manufacturers, industrial parties, and federal facilities. They're not looking at farmers, because farmers are passive receivers. Again, as I mentioned, liability can come in two, different forms. It can come to USDA for engaging potentially on a property, or it can come, be attached to the landowner who owns the property who's farming it. But regardless, a PFAS contaminated farm is still contaminated. So with that, I'd like to move on to a class definition. So what we've seen is there's no really consensus class definition related to agriculture. We have seen some PFAS consensus class definitions for different industries or different entities, like in the National Defense Appropriations Act or in certain other legislation. But what this means is there's no single definition that is really a consensus class that's related to agriculture. So it's easy to define, PFOA or PFAS or certain chemical structures, because they are chemical structures and they can be defined in that setting. But defining a class of PFAS and coming up with a consensus for agriculture is important. And why is that important? Because it can be broad and narrow depending on the definition. I've seen some potential legislation out there that will use a definition, and maybe it doesn't include all the PFAS it should, or maybe it includes too many PFAS, so it has to be well thought out. And also, any definition that comes out, it has to be interpreted and understood by USDA staff as well as producers, so they understand if the program works, the legislation applies to them or not. So again, it's a little more tricky than it might seem. It's easy to define single PFAS compounds just because of their chemical structure. But there's different ways to go by class definitions that include categories or toxic effects, and it's important that we get one right for agriculture. So next slide, please. Yeah, I want to transition real quick to talk about a few programs where PFAS is intersecting right now within the Farm Service Agency. And this includes what we call the Dairy Indemnity Payment Program, or Dept. And this is the only named safety program that we have that's named for PFAS. And it's basically, it's been around for decades. It was designed for aflatoxins, but it includes other toxic substances. And it has actually PFAS named in the regulation. It's not meant to be a long-term program, but it covers milk losses, and it also covers cattle losses. It's supposed to last for 3 months, but that can be extended. And it has been used for PFAS in several instances throughout the United States. Again, this is our one name program within the mission area. That's a safety net program that does include PFAS right now. Next slide, please. And as mentioned before, I just want to talk about, really our real estate transactions, where we kind of get into that ownership aspect of CERCLA liability. And there's certain processes that we take, and it really mirrors just private financial industry, what they do for due diligence processes, and it follows the EPA's all appropriate inquiries rule. And this covers our farm loans, our FSA farm loans, where we go out and we take security interest in land. And it also covers NRCS agricultural conservation easements, where NRCS will go out and they'll have a long-term type of ownership type of interest in the land. But what we're really looking to do is we're really looking to assess the level of risk and scope of liability at a subject property before we take a long-term real estate interest in it. And basically looking for the same thing: release of hazardous substances, also petroleum products in this case, even though those are not under CERCLA, they're more of a RCRA regulated substances. But we're looking for recognized environmental conditions, basically any past release of PFAS or other hazardous substances or petroleum products on a property that could affect its suitability for program participation, and also get a proper valuation on that as we go through the process. So we do phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessments. If there's an indication that there might be a hazardous substance that could, become a liability issue in the future, and then we want to maintain our liability protections under the law by going through this all appropriate inquiries process. So with that, that's really all I had to discuss today with you guys. I appreciate the time. And then I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Prine so she can talk a little bit more about the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA.
All right, thank you, Kel, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me today. As Jim mentioned, I'm the National Discipline Lead for Environmental Compliance with NRCS. His introduction was very kind, but what it really is a fancy way of saying I do NEPA. I've been doing NEPA for about 20 years, previously with DOD, the Navy, and now here with the NRCS. So things are changing in the world of NEPA, as some of you may know, with the current administration, but they've been changing over the last 5 or 6 years, back and forth. It's kind of been a little bit of a teeter-totter. It's not going to have a huge impact on how we do NEPA within the NRCS because our process is already very streamlined. And I'll go into a little bit more detail on that. But we are subject to NEPA. All of the programs that are covered in our Farm Bill are subject to NEPA, including our watershed programs and dam rehabilitation, which I'll kind of divide on how we do NEPA on both of those. We do have our own NEPA regulations, and we are in the process of updating them. We also use a programmatic approach to NEPA compliance. We review and update those programmatic NEPA documents with each Farm Bill. So right now we're still with the 2018 Farm Bill. If we get a new Farm Bill this year, we will take a second look at all of our programmatic documents, address any changes that are covered in the Farm Bill, and make sure that we are still compliant with the NEPA regulations as they stand today. We do an environmental evaluation process. You may hear us refer to CPA 52. I think Bill referred to that the first time that we met with you. It is part of our planning process, and we have integrated NEPA into that process. We are also in the process of integrating it even further into the conservation desktop planning process. Again, focused on streamlining and getting assistance to our farmers quicker in the field. We do rely heavily on our CEs, the category exclusions. We have 21 CEs that cover our the conservation practices that we do. And Every now and then it will trigger additional NEPA, but for the most part, the conservation standards are covered either under a CE or one of our programmatic environmental assessments. When you see the NRCS doing an EA or an EIS, those are more focused towards our watershed planning programs. They're just simply larger sites. They involve more. But again, it's still worked into the planning process and part of the whole CPA 52 worksheet and the watershed plan itself. So that's very brief. That's really all I have for NEPA, but just wanted to make sure that you folks were aware that we are compliant with NEPA. We are required to be compliant with NEPA, and we are rolling with all the changes that are coming our way. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you to all our panelists this morning. I'd like to open it up for questions. I have a question, Bill. It's for Bill mostly. Bill, I think some of us struggle with, farm level, and I don't know really where my question is going. Are we talking about agricultural fields, forested lands, pastures, rangelands, et cetera?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, we help and can go beyond that too. If you look at the landowners if they're involved in agriculture, any agricultural lands that they have under them, we will assist with. So we have a number of land uses that you just named off. We have ones that are even different, like associated ag lands, which is like the area between pivots. Water and wetlands, if those are a part of the landowner's property, let's say they have a pond on site, we're going to look at and talk about that pond with the landowner. So yes, I mean, anything that the landowner has got control over and they're involved in an agricultural activity is basically what we're going to be talking to them about and looking at natural resource issues that may be there and what can we do to improve that. It may be that they have specific interests. Typically when they come to us, they have, let's say, an erosion problem. They're going to come to us and want to talk about the erosion problem. And we're going to definitely address that. But we're also going to look at their entire area, their entire property, and look and see if we see any other natural resource issues that we also should talk about. And they may not choose to address them all, but we want to present them and make sure that they're aware of the issues that are on their property.
Thank you. Other questions?
Hi, this is Tom Christensen. There's been a lot of discussion about conservation practices, practice standards, et cetera. How about the enhancements that are used, I guess, in support of conservation practice standards? Is that something you'd like the committee to also consider, the use of enhancements and changes, new ones, et cetera?
Yeah, I think what we'd like for you to do is to step back. Don't go too far into the weeds in terms of enhancements, in terms of even conservation practice standards. We aren't looking to have you develop new conservation practice standards or new enhancements. Those are things that we hope we'll be able to do after we get your report with recommendations. We're really looking to you to help us build this framework for dealing with PFAS as we put conservation on the ground to help the farmers. And And when you are talking about, and it may be hard to understand what a framework might be, but if I can give you an analogy, we're looking, one might be if we were looking to build a house and we've got some goals, we might want to know what are the options for the materials to build that house, and how would those things differ when you're looking at it across building it in one part of the United States versus another part of the United States. So what are those options? What are the considerations? If we want to live in that house through old age, what should we consider? Should we consider a two-story house or a one-story house? Should we consider a small one or a large one? So we're looking for you to help us understand what it is we should be thinking about and what are those considerations, but not go into specifics with regard to, for example, how the what color the living room should be painted. We will take care of the things that are within our purview, but hoping that you can help us understand what we should be thinking about. What are the important issues? How do we inform our decisions? I hope that helps.
Yeah, part of our statement of task is to provide the considerations for the development of an agricultural working definition of PFAS in the context of PFAS for which the US EPA has determined regional screening levels. We're trying to figure out or understand that a little bit better. Does it mean a list of specific PFAS to be concerned about? Does it mean setting a threshold above you need to be concerned, below no concern? Could you provide clarification on that?
I think I'm going to turn that over to Cale, since he has been looking at definitions and categories of definitions. Can I turn that to you, Cale?
Do they want a class definition for PFAS, or do they want an agricultural working definition, like the systems slide?
She just read the bullet in the statement of task about the PFAS definition.
And it says
Okay, so
agricultural
the class definition?
Agricultural, yeah.
Yeah, so I think what we're after here is we're after a broader type of definition that would basically, if it were applied to an FPAC mission area program, or even type of legislation related to agriculture, that it could cover the farmers appropriately and properly, regardless if those are listed in the EPA RSL table or regional screening level table, or listed as MCLs. So that's what we're after. It's more. I would not list. I don't think we want to list out 30,000 PFAS, but we want a definition that's comprehensive enough to cover what our producers would encounter on the ground related to how PFAS may have been released inadvertently on their farms. So we get proper program coverage for the folks.
And I think at the end of our presentation, we've included a slide that kind of has a few of the definitions. And you may already be familiar with them, but at least it may help you look at the different ways they're defined and what it might mean for agriculture.
Really appreciate the house building analogy. That was illustrative. I guess related to that, one of the things we've, I think, been trying to get a sense of is whether or not using the framework of the conservation practices physical effects planning tool that's out there, is that a useful way to try to structure resource concern intersected with practice identification to try to prioritize certain things? Or is that something maybe that is out there but is not necessarily really widely used in your field offices and things like that?
So let me start by saying how CPPE is used and how it's developed. So CPPE is looking at each practice and looking at how it impacts our resource concerns in terms of a positive or a negative. And so the national discipline leads that are in charge of the practices go through and go through this process. A lot of it is, it's not it's more of an art than it is an exact science, because obviously if you're, say, putting in, and I'm going to give a waste storage structure because I'm an environmental engineer as an example, if you're putting in one of those, and you start looking at what are the impacts to things like water quality or air issues, it's going to be site specific. And so it's a pretty general look at positives and negatives. A lot of times our folks in the field will take that and they'll use it as a training tool for some of our employees to kind of say, think about some of these impacts when you're doing the planning. So for us, it's a training tool. It's also a tool that we use as a part of, we used to use it more for the categorical exclusion thought process. We now use network effects diagrams. It's a little bit different tool, but it's a way for us as NDLs to go through and systematically think about and kind of roughly categorize what the positives and negative impacts are for our conservation practices. For example, if I'm taking waste out of a waste storage structure and I'm using it as an irrigation and I'm irrigating it to spread nutrients to grow a crop, I'm addressing a water quality concern. There may be a negative aspect for odor from that process. So we would say in there that we could have a negative for odor. And when we're training our folks, that knowing that should be a trigger. Is there something else that we could do to address odor, especially if this producer has already mentioned that odor is a concern? If they have neighbors, what can they do in addition to address those odor conditions? Maybe change the irrigation method so it's less likely to spread ammonia, or put up some screening types of maybe a vegetative hedge or something that's going to break up the odor and lessen the impacts. So from that standpoint, it's both a tool for the discipline leads to think about positives and negatives. It's also a training tool for our field folks so that they can think about some of those positive and negatives. What it's not is it's not an exact science. Like I said, it's more of an art because everything is still site specific.
Hi, yeah. So I'm going to bring us back to our statement of tasks because I think Jackie had asked about the seventh, the last bullet. The second to last bullet says provide guidance for decision making based on what is currently known as well as emerging information about the fate and transport of different PFAS and ag systems. I'm wondering if you can give us some examples or define sort of what you mean by decision making. What types of decision making? Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Yep. I think, again, I'm going to ask you to step back a little bit. When it can be any type of decision making, we make a lot of different decisions, but when you're making a decision, you go and you gather information to inform that decision. You analyze that information. You identify what you do and you don't know. So for us, it would be helpful in this context. What information do we need to pay attention to or gather when we are making decisions? How might we approach analyzing that information on PFAS? What do we do when we don't have information, or when in the absence or the limited information that we have. So it's stepping back just one step removed, not necessarily focusing on the decision, but that framework for making the decisions. Guidance for us. What should we think about? How should we approach things? What's important? What's not?
This is just a note. We definitely would like a copy of that 2022 study, the consulting study you mentioned that has some correspondence between identified practices and PFAS.
Sure,
I don't
we'd
think
be
we have
happy to
that,
give
right?
that to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or didn't know it existed either. Thanks.
Okay.
Okay, I have another question while they're, if that's okay. Can you walk us through what might happen, I guess, based on what you had told us about NEPA and about hazardous substances and things? If you had a staff person who is working with a farm that doesn't know that they're contaminated but are contaminated, or like or maybe they know, how does the testing come into this? I guess I'm wondering, if they test, where do those results go? How does that impact the decision making in terms of programs they're eligible for? That type of thing.
Yeah, excellent question. And I'll try to answer it succinctly. Right now, in most of the cases, the producer doesn't know and our staff don't know. The places that's not the case are when it's been brought to our attention by outside sources. In Maine, in the New Mexico dairy, in some other places where people have brought that issue to us and said, we know this is here. What do we do about it? Right now, our answer is we're not sure. We're still investigating. And we don't necessarily want to provide an answer because we could provide the wrong answer because again, we don't know. Last time I kind of went through a series of examples of questions that we've had in the past. And I'll go through a couple of those again just to kind of say how it came to us and how we addressed it. So one of them was we had a series of low dams where the dams were starting to become a problem, and we were worried about a cascade failure where these small dams may have one that fails and causes another one to fail, and then another one to fail. They're really small, 3-4 foot high dams, and they've got sediment behind them, and the state knows there's some level of PFAS in that sediment. The question comes to us: can we help them with decommissioning those dams? Ultimately, our decision was there's no good answer here, but we do know that the dam cascade failure is a problem. It's a public safety issue. Our direction to our state staff was yes, help with that issue and make sure everybody is aware that we're doing this because it's a public safety issue. And we gave them some ideas for some steps to take to make sure that they take steps to try and stabilize the sediment behind those dams as much as possible, realizing though that if a big storm comes along, there's still going to be a washout and moving of that material. So that's one. Another one is, we talked about irrigation. We had a farmer who irrigates and was an organic farmer, and they found out that their well had PFAS contamination, and they came to us and asked, "Can you help us move the well?" And And so we know, number one, that there's PFAS in the groundwater. And if we move the well, there's no guarantee that the place that they move it to will be PFAS free. So, and if, from a liability standpoint, we start talking about liability, Cale mentioned it, could we be getting ourselves into trouble by helping a farmer to move PFAS out of the aquifer onto the land where it could move? Again, we start bringing up these issues and mentioning those to the local people, and our recommendation was, this is not something that we have expertise in. This is not something that we can guarantee that if we move the well that it's going to be a success for us. And at that point, this was still early on, we're not sure that we could even design a system to remove the PFAS from irrigation water and take that route. Maybe that's a possibility now because we know more than we did when we first started. But that was a case where we're like, we're paralysis by not knowing how to keep ourselves out of trouble and help somebody. That's a common theme for us. Another situation, we had a dairy that was being decommissioned because they had a PFAS issue, and they wanted some help with erosion control, maybe on some of the fields where their cows had applied and there was high PFAS. Again, we had a discussion with them about the issues, but we did not provide financial assistance because of concerns of this is out of our realm of expertise, and we weren't sure that we could make a recommendation where we could be sure we weren't making the issue worse. Because we don't know. This is again early. We just didn't know. We don't know. So there's a few examples of how it's come about. There are not very many examples. Most of them that we've dealt with so far are in the states that you're familiar with: Maine, Michigan. Now we're starting. I mean, every month, new ones are popping up, of course, but it's still early for us in terms of dealing with this issue. And 99.9% of the farms that we're dealing with have no idea if they have an issue or not.
So I just want to touch on a little of the testing information and the data you mentioned. So if a farmer were to use our SEMA 209, the farmer and the qualified individual, the outside consultant, would have those data. They might share it with the NRCS office, but they are allowed to self-report those data. And in some cases, there might be state requirements or federal requirements that require them to share that PFAS finding if it exceeds a level. So that obviously is an issue for a farm. As USDA employees, we can't share that information that the farmer gives to us to participate in our programs, but they can definitely share it within their voluntary nature.
If they did share, or if you found out somehow that they had levels that, well, there aren't very many action levels in except for in Maine, but let's say it were, does it trigger something within the so somebody talked about the environmental assessment, and that is part of the process. Does it trigger something that you're like, oh, well, now they're not eligible anymore for certain programs, or they are, or how does that work, I guess? Or that's just not in place yet?
Yeah, and maybe I'll hand this off to Cale. It's most clear for our easement and our real estate, farm loan, long-term easement programs, but that's part of the conundrum that we're in. In the absence of federal standards, how do we act? And, there are some states that have specific standards for agricultural soils or water, but for many of the states, as Bill mentioned, those don't exist. So that's part of the uncertainty that we're facing.
I would just add, it depends a lot on the site-specific circumstance of what we're dealing with. It's always going to be a big role in it. We want to avoid the re-release, obviously, or the exacerbation of hazardous substances on property, and it's especially with groundwater. It could be a serious issue, but I think it really comes down to the site-specific circumstances. So it's very hard to define that without understanding the case, the situation, and how that conservation practice would intertwine with what's needed to be done out there. We are not in the business of remediation, at this time. So we want to help producers as much as we can in every aspect as we can. But we, like Bill mentioned, we don't want to make the situation worse for them. So we need good practical solutions is what we're after.
A question back on the SEMA 209. Is that available in every state, or can a state conservationist opt out not to offer that? And then if so, is it offered at 75% cost share? Kind of what's the parameters around the SEMA 209?
Yeah, I believe it is offered nationally. The state would have to allocate funding towards it in terms of limited funding. The cost share, I assume, would be subject to the other EQIP cost share, but I can get back to you to make sure that that's correct.
Okay, we are way over time. So thank you again for coming back or coming and helping us with any guidance, all the guidance that you've provided this morning. Thank you.
Thank you.